This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, and I am joined by co-host Jack Hirsch, former 6-time president of the Boxing Writers Association, 6-term president. I'll get that right one of these days.
I'm like Sugar Ray Robinson, losing and then regaining the title.
Former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. And Jack, let's just start off right away. This is going to be the Jack show because we're going to cover a lot of the IBF inductees this week. And you were there and I wasn't.
Boxing Hall of Fame, Frank.
That's right.
Yeah, International Boxing Hall of Fame. Right. I just got back a couple hours ago after spending a few days in Canastota, New York. Actually, part of it was in Verona, New York, because some of the festivities went on the grounds of where the Hall of Fame is held, because they had 3 classes going in at once. So it was a very busy weekend. But Frank, I didn't see all the fights. I only saw one show this weekend. I was actually ringside at the Turning Stone Casino to see Bakhdar Jalilov, the 2020 Olympic super heavyweight gold medalist, win by a stoppage in the 8th round. And we like to use the word about a fighter having potential. He's fundamentally sound. He's good. He's pretty polished right now for a relatively new pro. But I'm not sure how much upside he has. So in other words, Frank, the jury's still out.
Well, let me ask you this, Jack. I saw clips of the Bryan Dubois Fugazi WBA heavyweight title bout, which Dubois won in the 4th round with a left hook that didn't look like it would hurt me or you. I mean, what do you see there?
What do I see? I see Don King, age 91, promoting the show. A part of me wanted Trevor Bryan to win. Wouldn't it be great if King was on top, making demands and raising hell once again? I mean, people hated him when he did it, but at age 91, it's kind of like a badge of honor to be accused of being corrupt. I mean, with all
Jack, looking back, King is 91. He's had an unbelievable career. Remember, he listened to the first Ali Frazier fight on the radio and promoted the 3rd. It's an unbelievable story. But looking back now, compared to some of these cards we get that don't start until well into midnight for the main event, looking back, King's cards were a lot better and I think a little bit underappreciated then and more appreciated today.
Yeah, King, he put on better pay-per-view events than the other promoters back in the day. Okay, but King's method of operation was hustling. I mean, he was his own brand. The way he would go after fighters, the way he would relate to them, the way King knew the street side of certain fighters. Like if he owed a fighter $100,000, King would dump $25,000 in cash on the fighter's hotel room bed.
He did that to Muhammad Ali and saved $950,000.
Right, and but for certain fighters, a lot of them, unfortunately, the reality of seeing the cash meant more to them than a check. Okay,
Jack, think about this. We won't spend much time on this, but think about this. What if King was around in the Marciano era. Rocky would have been fighting for $5,000 a fight as long as he got the payment in cash, because he was the same way. Hated checks, loved cash, didn't want Al Wheel to get any of his money. That would have been something.
King would have been promoting Marciano, even though they seem like complete opposites. He would have been promoting them. But it's amazing. Age 91. Look, he had a fight at Trevor Bryan. King is doing enough to just basically stay in the game. Okay,
that's all he's doing, Jack.
I think he likes the idea of being somewhat relevant. I mean, that they notice him, they ask him questions, and maybe thought this fight at Trevor Bryan, when Daniel Dubois is actually a good prospect until he got knocked out by Joe Joyce. You know, they thought he'd be fighting for the heavyweight title. That kind of set him back, and now he's on track again.
Well, the eye injury was a factor there. He does have potential. I would not write him off. He can still look. The division is so thin. Who knows? After Joshua, Fury, Usyk, and Wilder, who knows what we have? The second line is very, very pedestrian. But Jack, I saw another pedestrian guy, and I know you're going to have fun on this, but Edgar Berlanga went the distance for the fourth time this week against Alexis Nguyen. I'll tell you what. I thought Edgar Berlanga had a shot to be special because he can punch, he's good looking, and he has that aura about him of maybe danger when he fights. But I have to admit, he has really plateaued since he stepped up in caliber of fighter. He's young, he can still learn, but my problem with him is, Jack, he just can't combine or blend offense and defense. When he's fighting, I actually see him in his mind saying, okay, I'm going to go on offense, and then after I cut loose with this combo, I'm going to play defense and lay back and then look for my opening. And nothing is natural or instinctive, because there were a lot of shots or a lot of spots in the fight Saturday night against Angulo where he could have taken advantage of him. But he had a guy in there who was 38, awkward, experienced, and did just enough to make him look bad. I had Berlanga winning the fight, maybe 6-4, very close fight. The scoring was lopsided, but I am not sure that Berlanga is going to be and hit the ceiling that I thought that he might have had.
Frank, why don't you just say it? Jack was right, Frank was wrong. You're ready to say that.
Jack, he's 24 years old. He can still learn.
You want more evidence? I told you a few fights ago when he had that string of first-round knockouts, and then finally he had one fight that went the distance, which he just got by with. You were saying, oh, no, I still think.
Be careful, Jack. Don't put where I said he had potential to be a star. I didn't say it was going to be. I'm going to back off that a little bit.
You back off it completely, Frank. He's not going to be a star. He's not good enough. Sometimes we don't simplify things. Some guys just aren't good enough, okay? They just don't have the talent. Berlanga is good enough to beat faded veterans or guys who are very average. And even then, it's not going to look sensational.
Okay.
But he has.
Jack, he's 24. He can still learn. There's still a lot to go. But right now, I'm dialing it back.
He's been fighting a while. What's he been a pro? Like about 5 years or thereabouts?
He has what? He has less than 50 rounds experience.
Because the guys he was knocking on one round.
He knocked out a bunch of stiffs, but I think the power's real. But I have a problem with him, with his delivery at the highest level. Also, another guy who some were high on was Jaime Munguia, who stopped Jim Kelly in the 5th round of a 165-pound catchweight bout.
Munguia's much better than Berlanga. Don't put him in the same category as Berlanga.
Jack, take it easy. I'm just giving an update on the fight. I'm not saying that Munguia is anything, but I'll tell you this much. He's yelling for Jamal Charlo, and if he fights him, he will get taken to school. And if he fights your boy, Demetrius, I haven't seen him in 5 years, Andrade, and I won't fight anybody. Even Andrade will take Munguia apart because Munguia cannot deal with footwork and movement, and that really bothers him. But, I mean, he beat a middle-of-the-road guy the other night. He looked great doing it. We know he can hit, but he has a ceiling too.
Right. I agree with you about the ceiling Munguia has. He's not going to be a superstar, not going to be a major star, but keep this in mind. Munguia has a lot of rounds under his belt.
That's true.
And he's fundamentally sound too. So on a given day, given night, Munguia could maybe conceivably upset one of the upper echelon guys. I'm not saying he would. I'm not predicting he would, but it's not that far of a reach.
I'll tell you what, he looked huge. He looked huge at 165. And I agree with our buddy Joe Bergman. You know what? Berlanga-Munguia, let's see that fight between two hype guys.
Munguia wins. Berlanga doesn't make the fight. They can't make it. Berlanga fights for top rank. Munguia fights for golden boy. So right there.
Yeah, that won't happen.
It's hard to get the exact combo when they're both with a promotional group and they're willing to match them.
All right, Jack, let's get to the Hall of Fame because you're scratching it. You're scraping at things to try to get a couple wins under your belt because we know that Crawford and Spence are going to fight this year, and you're trying to pin Berlanga on me. So let's go with the Hall of Fame.
Frank, feel free to jump right in with any of these names that I mentioned.
Go ahead.
Keep in mind, these are the last 3 Hall of Fame classes. I mean, some of them we know so much about, I don't have to give you one line on them. Bernard Hopkins.
All-time great, could do anything in the ring and understood the business of boxing and what was important more than anybody.
Comment on each guy. Juan Manuel Marquez.
Was Manny Pacquiao's kryptonite. Great counter puncher. All-time great. Definitely well-deserved.
All-time great? I wouldn't go that far.
He's on the cusp.
Well, no. Well, I don't know about that. Okay. Shane Mosley.
I don't think Shane ever hit his potential, Jack. I don't like that he went up. I have a little issues with the PEDs. However,
I have a big issue with the PEDs.
I think if he would have stayed at lightweight, I think he had a chance to be maybe one of the best lightweights since Duran, but that didn't happen, and we saw what happened when he went up.
Isn't that unusual?
And he hit it, Jack. He hit a level where he never got better, and when he moved up in weight, he felt like he was the puncher. And a lot of fights when he had no chance of being the puncher against Vernon Forrest or Winky Wright.
Funny thing about Shane Mosley, his legacy is going to be the couple of right hands he landed that wobbled Floyd Mayweather. That's what people think about with Shane Mosley, which is kind of odd.
He hurt Mayweather more than any other fighter.
Yeah, he did. Christy Martin.
Pioneer.
And you know who she gave credit to when she gave a Hall of Fame speech?
Don't say Jackie Tonawanda.
No, to Don King, because Don King, she said, took a chance on her when no one was doing it.
She was on all the Tyson undercards.
Right. So give Don King credit for his promoting a Christy Martin because she did. This should have been a rival. Lucia Riker.
Dynamite in that left hook and fought like... was one of the first female fighters that made you think that women have a place in boxing.
Unfortunately for her, her peak was before women's boxing really became popular because she was considered the best. Now, there's another woman that's a pioneer. You know, I saw some tape on her, Barbara Budrick. You know, she... according to this, and I'm looking at the press release there, she had a 31-1 record, 1,000 exhibitions. I don't know, could that be verified? But she found the Women's International Boxing Federation in 1993. But she was a trailblazer, Barbara Budrick. Okay. Frank Ernie. I don't know, you know, I always pronounce him wrong. Frank Erne, E-R-N-E. You talk about a real old timer. He won the lightweight championship in 1898. And listen,
which is about all I could tell you about him.
Right. And he was a boxing instructor at Yale. Remember when they used? Long ago they used college boxing.
College boxing was big at one point.
Popular then. You know, he always wins over fighters like George Dixon and Joe Gaines, which is pretty good. And Patty Ryan. Who fought John L. Sullivan for, you know, the title, and he got stopped by the mighty John L. Sullivan in 1882. Okay, he was a bare knuckle guy, Patty Ryan. Lou DiBella. What do you think
Lou
of Lou?
DiBella. I think of HBO and Boxing After Dark. That's what I think of when I think of DiBella.
Yeah, I know DiBella quite well from New York, and yeah, he's worthy. I mean, he has DiBella Entertainment, his promotional.
Right.
In fact, he promotes George Kambosos now. He promotes some other guys as well, but I think Kambosos is the biggest single name who he promotes. Kathy Duva.
A pioneer to a degree because she's one of the few women making it big in a man's sport, which is, rare. So I'll say with her, pioneer, survivor, smart woman, took over for her husband when he passed.
Yeah, she did. I mean, you got to give her credit. And she promoted fighters like Sergey Kovalev on her own.
He carried that organization for a while. He was their only main event guy.
Right. And she promoted Zab Judah for a little while when they brought Judah back and he won a sanctioning body belt under, Kathy Duva. That was.
And then they have tomorrow's champions too. Then they have Ramos and Chez.
That was main events. Yeah. I'm thinking of what Kathy did afterwards. She was involved in main events. So you look at the body of work. There's Dan Goosen, who promoted the Ruelas brothers, Michael Nunn, Terry Norris, Paul Williams, Joe Casamayor, Andre.
That's a hell of a lineup.
Yeah, you know what? A lot of times, Frank, as you well know, a promoter doesn't promote a fighter for their whole career. At some point, there's a falling out. The
fighter gets a little bigger and he moves on.
Yeah, even Manny Pacquiao was with Top Rank for so long. At the end of his career, he kind of looked elsewhere. From your turf, my buddy Bernard Fernandez.
You know what, Jack? Let me tell you something. I used to go to the AC fights with Bernard, and we would drive down together. If there's a nicer guy in this sport, I haven't met him.
Great guy. A very close friend of mine. To me, his induction was the most enjoyable thing I witnessed. Due to personal reasons, he was unable to attend. He had good reasons not to.
I understand that, Jack. I exchanged a couple of texts with him today.
Right, exactly. But he was.
But seriously, people say
by us in the BWAA.
People say this all the time, and look, in this sport, and I know it's no different than other sports, but there's a lot of jealousy, a lot of cutthroats, and a lot of backstabbers. And Bernard Fernandez does not fit in any of those categories. He will help anybody out. I mentioned last week or the week before when we did Bernard Hopkins, I was writing about Hopkins a lot for the Sweet Science. And Hopkins, you know how he is. If he doesn't know you, he doesn't trust you. And Bernard Fernandez set it up and he said, look, Bernard, this guy will do right by you. He's a good guy. You can go by his word. He set it up, and I told you, Bernard Hopkins and I spoke on the phone for 3 hours.
Wow. One thing about Bernard Hopkins, he could really talk.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's got a little jailhouse hustle too, but he's nobody to mess with when it comes to verbal.
They're going to have to change Bernard Hopkins' plaque because they put in a wrong middle name for him on his introduction.
Oh, really?
We'll leave it at that,
And he will not let them forget that.
Now, journalist Thomas Hauser.
I know Tom a little bit. Tom gets the best interviews. He's been a go-between for me, a few guys. All my experiences with Tom, I like him. And obviously, he probably made his mark when he wrote the preeminent biography of Muhammad Ali.
Okay. Vladimir Klitschko. Now, how do you rate him amongst the greats?
I have a hard time, Jack, finding 15 heavyweights before or after him who could beat him. I think he's one of the hardest punchers.
Doesn't he have the most defenses next to Joe Louis, the most successful?
I think he does. He's up there. I think he has the most, or he's first or second in title bout wins for heavyweights. I think Louis is 27-1, and I think Klitschko's like 25 or 26. Ali had 23 or 22. Holmes had 21, so he's up there. Dynamite right hand.
Louis has 25, I believe. But the point is with Klitschko, he didn't quite have the opposition,
No.
to elevate him. You know, at the end of his career, he had Fury and Joshua, but that was at the end, basically.
But, Jack, I've heard a lot of people say that, and this is what I say to that. Look, he went 10 years, and he defended that title successfully and didn't lose. And you know what? You had to have fought somebody really good over 10 years, and look who it took to beat him. It took Fury to beat him at the end of his career, and look at how we look at Fury now. So that looks pretty good for Klitschko.
Next Hall of Famer, the man some consider the greatest of all time.
I know you're going to say it's not true.
Floyd Money Mayweather, one of your favorites.
Best manager in the history of boxing. Maybe the second best salesman after Ali.
So
outstanding talent.
Manager in boxing, maybe?
I think Mayweather may be.
He might be. So you're
absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Jack, when I think of Mayweather, that's what I think of. He never made a wrong decision. Everybody makes a wrong decision in this sport. Mayweather never miscalculated. Not one time. And I'll give you something else, and I'll let it go. I couldn't have been more wrong. One of my worst calls ever was when I said, maybe in 2010, 2012, when Floyd Mayweather retires, he will be a week-old ghost 7 days after his retirement. I stole that line from Ali, and I was wrong. Mayweather knows how to play, and here we are still talking about him.
Frank, so in other words, you're telling me if he signs for an exhibition, you're going to purchase it. 1999.
No. I didn't buy his fights when he was in his prime.
I thought you got all fights, Frank. So
no, I tricked my friends to buy them. I don't think I paid for one Mayweather fight.
Okay, Andre Ward.
Okay, this is not going to go over well. I think Andre Ward is a guy that was great, who bent the rules, who knew the business, who hadn't lost since he was a junior Olympian. I think he is probably one of the top 3 super middleweights of all time and can live with a lot of the great heavyweights.
Does it bother you, and I disagree, when you hear someone like his broadcast partner, Joe Tessitore, refer to Andre Ward as one of the greatest fighters of all time? When I hear that, I kind of wince. It's carrying it a little too far. Listen, certain great fighters like Andre Ward and Joe Calzaghe, I admire them tremendously. I'll tell you why I admire them tremendously, because they got out at the right time. They didn't push it a little more. But then again, if they pushed it a little more, they would have entered the territory of absolute all-time greats, like a short list perhaps, you know, like the Sugar Ray Leonard territory. If Andre Ward had continued for, let's say, 6 more fights, and maybe a couple of them were massive against the right opponents, he could have entered the same car as Sugar Ray Leonard, gotten a seat in the same car. Okay, but he didn't. And
I don't know if I totally agree with that, Jack, but I do respect guys that get out with their health, their wealth, and respect. And he knew how the game was played, and I can't put him down for getting out at the right time.
No,
again,
I admire that.
And at the time, he was the number 1 pound-for-pound guy on that hypothetical list. And I'll tell you something else, Jack. I look at Lennox Lewis the same way. Some people say, well, he should have given Vitaly a rematch. No, he beat Vitaly on his worst night, and he got out just in time. And at that time, Vitaly was the biggest threat to him. He won the fight. Nobody else cut Vitaly but Lennox with that right hand in the later in the fight for it to be stopped.
It's not about Leonard and Vitaly right now, but I know.
But my point is, what you're saying about Ward is, I respect guys that get out on top, and he did. And I think he was a great fighter. All-time great, not sure, but a great fighter, yes.
Medalist, great fighter, but like Joe Bergman said, I felt he bent the room.
Absolutely. He had a black belt bending the rules, just like Hopkins.
Yeah. Layla Ali.
I can't be objective on this one, Jack, because I don't like her personally, but she was a good...
Whoa, Frank, you're not getting away with this. You don't like her personally?
No.
Well. Let's
Now, there are some things about her I don't care for, that I think she's a little condescending, and I think she thinks she's a little better than she is, but she never lost. She was a good boxer, and in the women's game, she definitely was a player. Layla Ali is probably the only thing regarding Muhammad Ali that I don't like. I've met all of Ali's children. I like her the least.
Wow. You know, I was at the Layla Ali Jacqueline Frazier fight in the Turning Stone Casino. I think that was.
I watched Jackie train for it.
Yeah. What a fight that was. Layla won the majority decision. Deserved. Close fight. But
close fight, though.
Great fight. And I had the honor. I actually took the elevator back to our rooms. When I got on, Smoking Joe was on the elevator. I didn't say anything to him, but I was observing him. And he didn't seem too upset. And late I spoke to someone very close to him. And they said, Joe was just relieved Jackie didn't embarrass herself, so he was happy, to get it over with. Speaking of a woman fighter here, I wouldn't want to bump into her in any dark alley. Ann Wolf.
Ann Wolf. Beast.
Tough.
Beast.
Did you ever see
another pioneer too? Because when she started, women's boxing was not mainstream then.
Did you ever see a better right hand than the one she did to knock out Von der Wart?
No, that's up there.
Oh boy, I would compare that punch to anything. Totally. That
was like a Hearns right hand, no doubt.
Oh my. Okay, then this fighter. I don't know you're familiar with her, Marion Tremor. I'm not sure she's from Philadelphia here. It said she was lightweight champion 1979 to 1981. Who would have cared about who held what title in women's boxing?
I've heard our friend Randy Gordon talk about her, and that's pretty much all I know about her.
No, that's not. You have to think about, Marion.
Not Jackie Tonawanda. No, Marion Tremor. I think she's elderly now and in a home, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that her?
She was actually there, but not in the best of condition.
Randy had spoken to me about her.
Okay, Jackie Tonawanda. Now, Jackie Tonawanda, we all knew she hadn't had those fights. Randy wrote a great story on it.
For New York Fights.
Tremendous credit to Randy for a well-written story, good story, but it's not anything that we didn't know. That was like.
But Jack, she can't be in the Hall of Fame.
But the thing about it, this playing devil's advocate strictly playing devil's advocate. She took the New York State Athletic Commission to court to get a license. A woman did that. Does that make her like a pioneer?
I would have an easier time with that than her going in as a fighter, especially when she lied about her record, about all the fights she had. No, I have you lose credibility with that. Put her in as a pioneer, somebody like that, but not as a fighter.
Okay. No arguments there at all. Davey Moore, not the Davey Moore who got stopped by Roberto Duran, but
the lightweight Davey Moore,
right? Who was the featherweight champion.
Okay, right, featherweight.
Who died tragically when he lost his title to Sugar Ramos. His head and neck hit the bottom strand of rope, and Angelo Dundee always said the bottom strand of rope isn't necessary. It creates more of a hazard. And that's, food for thought. That, in other words, it shouldn't be there altogether. But Davey Moore,
I've seen films of him, Jack, some highlights. I don't like to talk emphatically or as an authority on guys I didn't really see. But from what I saw, he well-deserved.
Yeah, and Freddie Brown, trainer Freddie
Corner
Brown.
Man.
Let me say something interesting. Some people are saying, and I'm not sure, is this what Stallone had in mind? The character Mickey in the movie Rocky, the trainer, was based on Freddie Brown because he seemed to be exactly that type of gruff type guy who was really gentle, inside, but really tough, gruff on the surface. But he was a corner man, a trainer, cut man for Floyd Patterson, Rocky Graziano, Roberto Duran, Larry Holmes, Aaron Pryor, Rocky Marciano. I mean, phenomenal list of fighters.
I think of the stories he could tell
Oh, yeah.
if he was around.
Dr. Margaret Goodman. Okay, she's in Las Vegas.
Vegas, right.
Heavily involved with drug testing to try to clean up the sport. And despite Margaret's sincere efforts in her hard and honorable work, if you just look at the amount of fighters who were caught, being on PEDs, getting into the Hall of Fame, what does that say about them? What does it say about the people who vote for them? I mean, if this were baseball, so many great fighters wouldn't be getting in the Hall of Fame. So something about boxing disregards things that other sports take seriously. And I'm not sure what the answer is to all that.
As far as commenting on her, Jack, I kind of follow fighters. I mean, from what I understood, she did her job and no one really had to complain about her. So, I don't know what to say about that. Good for her.
West Coast trainer. He's not alive now. Passed in 97. Jackie McCoy. Now, Jackie McCoy was the West Coast's equivalent of Gil Clancy. Exactly. Right. The only difference was Clancy got...
And he made matches too, right?
McCoy, well, he was not officially, but he was influential that way. He trained fighters like Mando Ramos, Rodolfo Gonzalez, Carlos Palomino. He was the Los Angeles's version of Gil Clancy was in New York. Right. No different on the level of Clancy. It took him too long to get in the Hall of Fame, but thankfully he got in. I don't know whether you knew journalist George Kimball. He wrote the book, The Four Kings, actually, that Showtime made.
I corresponded with him via email, Jack, but we didn't, and we had some nice conversations that way, but I can't say I know him.
Right. But he wrote the book, The Four Kings. He was like a great journalist, authored a good number of books, and later Showtime.
He wrote for the Boston Herald, right?
Right, exactly. Good one, Frank. Jay Larkin, the Showtime, senior vice president and executive producer, who helped make Showtime into a powerhouse.
And they superseded HBO.
Right. Eventually, that's right. Okay, Miguel Cotto. How do you rate him, Frank?
Borderline great fighter. Was one of the rare swarmers.
Borderline great or borderline all-time great?
Borderline great, not all-time great. Borderline great fighter. And what I respect about Cotto was, when he fought at 140, he was always the pressure guy and the attacker. But when he moved up in weight and he couldn't go over guys like he could at 140, he learned how to box and retreat. And I respect that. The same thing that Barrera did in his career when he moved up in weight. So well-deserved by Cotto. I have no problem with that. He deserved it. He really was never in a bad fight. I liked watching him fight, and I followed his career closely. So well-deserved. Congratulations.
There's a debate. Let's take Wilfred Benitez out of the equation, because my feeling would be he's perhaps the greatest fighter to come out of Puerto Rico, but it's debatable. But Cotto...
Is he better than Trinidad?
Cotto or Felix Trinidad? Who would you rate higher?
Trinidad by a smidgen, because I think his run at 147 was better than Cotto's at 140.
Cotto gave Money Mayweather quite a good fight.
He did, and that was at 154.
Right, he made Money Mayweather pull out all the stops. And even when the fight was over, Mayweather went to Cotto and said, you won some rounds. He said, sport.
How nice of Floyd to say that.
Yeah, no, he didn't say, I thought I won every round.
Floyd waited until he had...
Floyd said,
Floyd waited until he was thrashed by Margarito and Pacquiao, and then he fought him. Typical Mayweather.
Okay. Roy Jones Jr. All-time.
Think about this, Jack. Had Roy Jones retired after fighting and beating John Ruiz for the WBA heavyweight title, You know, the only guy pound for pound that might rank above him would be Sugar Ray Robinson. I would have to say that in my lifetime following boxing from 1964 through today, excluding heavyweights, Roy Jones and Ray Leonard are the two most gifted fighters I've ever seen.
When Jones fell off the cliff, he went down quick. He really went down quick. Some fighters,
and it's a shame, Jack, because it was after he beat Ruiz, and the fight Ruiz, he bulked up. He put on 20 or 25 pounds of muscle. He looked sensational in the fight. Maybe other than Tua, beat Ruiz more convincingly than anybody else until Ruiz really aged, and then he was a shell of himself. But then he lost that weight. He sucked it up against Tarver in their first fight. I thought he pulled the fight out in the 12th round. I thought he beat Tarver the first time.
I scored it from 2. Yeah, I had him.
But Jack, from the rematch on, when he got stopped, he should. It's like we look at him now and like he's been stopped 9 times. Think about this. Carlos Ortiz was only stopped 1 time in 70 fights, and it was in the last fight of his career. Roy's been stopped about 9 times.
You know what it is about Roy Jones? Had he retired after the Ruiz fight, you could make this argument. Okay, I'm not saying how he'd be rated compared to Sugar Ray Robinson, even Sugar Ray Leonard. But I will say this: no fighter in boxing history showed the level of dominance, okay? Maybe not greatness necessarily, but dominance that Roy Jones showed.
He didn't lose rounds.
He hardly lost a round. I mean, even Pernell Whitaker, fights that he supposedly was robbed in against Chavez, it being called a draw. Ramirez, when I gave the first fight to Ramirez, you can argue that Chavez won a few rounds, that Ramirez won a few rounds, even though they didn't beat Whitaker, okay? But they at least were competing, for every 2 rounds those guys, Whitaker won, his opponents will win 1 round, and Whitaker will win 2.
Jack, here's the difference, and a lot of Whitaker fans are going to go crazy, so I'm going to say this right off the bat. I know Whitaker is a better offensive fighter than most people give him credit for being. However, the difference with Roy is Roy was one of the best offensive fighters we've ever seen, and it carried from fight to fight. And I agree with Brandon, Jack. Think about this. He should have really retired after the first Tarver fight, because then he went back down, got the title, and he could walk away saying, I won the heavyweight title. The only loss on my record was the DQ against Montel Griffin, and nobody beat me.
Well, I think with Roy Jones, he loved boxing too much. There was some controversy, Frank, at the Hall of Fame. Vladimir Klitschko, because he's in Ukraine, obviously couldn't attend, but he sent a taped message. And
I saw it.
Roy Jones. I'm not sure of the land Crimea, the situation there. Shame on me for not fully understanding it. I don't know, is that the place to do it with Jones being inducted, for him to say that, and Jones having to hear that, when he's being inducted.
Jack, I agree with you. Look, we've talked about them.
Roy has dual citizenship, it should be pointed out.
I know.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Klitschkos, and I have the utmost respect for them fighting for their country. I'd like to think I would do the same under the same circumstance, but no one can say until you're in that moment. However, I am a little tired of them lecturing about Bivol shouldn't have been allowed to fight Canelo, about raining on Roy's parade and bringing politics into boxing like they had. Like, I know that politics is in everything, but I really wish they would have. They could have kept it quiet for a day and maybe told Roy, got message to him what they thought. But I don't like them making a spectacle of that. And Jack, I'll just say this:
allowed it. I don't think it should have been allowed.
Okay, that's fine. But you know what? There's a part of me that thinks the Klitschkos are very hardliners, but there's a part of me, Jack, also that thinks that they're kind of being played by this war to a degree too, and they're being used. So I wish they would have kept their mouth shut.
Okay, now I'm looking at this. I'm going to go down the list a few more names. Regina Halmick, a woman fighter. I can't believe this press release, made 41 successful world title defenses, ruling at the same time the flyweight, and super flyweight divisions. When you tell me 41 title defenses, you lost me. But whatever. But she was a name amongst women boxing. Holly Holm, who is basically best known for taking down Ronda Rousey in the UFC bout. But what people forget, she was a very credible boxer, would fight a lot in the Albuquerque area. There's Todd Morgan, the first world champion from the state of Washington. He was a junior lightweight champion from 1925 to 1929, won 143 fights, beat good fighters like Johnny Dundee and Sammy Mandel. There's the publicist Bill Kaplan, who I know, who was best known as being Big George Foreman's publicist. Big George.
I know Bill. I know Bill.
Yeah. Big George could be a mean, surly guy, but Bill Kaplan would bring out the best, in George. Then there's a ring announcer whose time, people forget from Las Vegas from the past, Chuck Hull.
I love Chuck Hull.
Right.
I thought he had the best demeanor of all. I like Johnny Addy's voice the best, but Chuck Hull had a way of commanding the spot when he was introducing the fighters and reading the decision. I was a big Chuck Hull guy.
But Chuck Hull was the ring announcer for the Cooney Holmes fight.
Yep.
In which they announced Holmes first. He shouldn't have done that. I wonder whether anyone put him up to that. Because if that was his call on his own.
Jack, you know what happened there? Cooney and Holmes had to flip a coin. And whoever came into the ring first was introduced last. That's what happened.
Well, Holmes wasn't expecting that, but that's a thing another time. Then
and remember, Cooney got parity, so you could see why Holmes was so mad and purposeful in that fight.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. But journalist Ron Borges, okay?
Made a name for himself picking Holyfield over Tyson the first time they fought. That's what I think of.
But an outstanding writer as well. The Boxing Writers Association of America has a writing contest called the Bernies.
I've never met Ron. I've read him and I know of him.
Right. Great writer. Then there's Bob Yalen, who he was big into record keeping in the early years, and then he worked for ESPN and ABC. And lastly, a spotlight fighter got inducted this week, so we could talk a bit about my spotlight fight of the week.
Lights out,
Tony. What do you think?
Joe, Jack, give me your take on Tony, and let me see if I fall in line.
Something about James Toney. I feel he could have been a little bit more. Had trouble making weight when he was a middleweight. You wonder whether he was as devoted as he could be. I'm going to tell you this, Frank, from a purely skill perspective, nothing more than that. I don't know if I ever seen a more skillful boxer than James Toney. I don't mean a guy like Muhammad Ali, for example. All-time great. Sugar Ray Robinson, all-time great. But they did a lot of what they did on talent and toughness. Tony was old school, the way, with the shoulder roll. I mean, he did things on pure skill for the most part. A great fighter.
I agree, Jack. I don't think that he reached his full ability. However, from his skill set, I actually think Tony was even better than Mayweather when he was in shape, because Tony was great defensively, but he didn't sacrifice his offense as much as Mayweather did. Where Mayweather would make you miss, you get hit back with a jab maybe, or maybe a right. Where Tony could put his punches together off of counters. He's definitely a throwback fighter. He could be a pressure fighter when he had to be. He had an all-world chin, and how many times was he down? My problem with Tony was he gets a little overrated at middleweight and junior or super middleweight when he actually had some stinkers in those weights, but it was when he moved up and he fought cruiserweights and heavyweights where his chin saved him and his skill helped him thrive against those guys. Sort of what Canelo has done, only in a better fashion. But Tony is, a great talent, all-time great fighter. I'm not sure what class I rate him in. I don't think he's an all-time great middleweight. Maybe up there as far as super middleweights goes based on the talent, but he didn't have the title long. But fun to watch, never stopped, entertaining. But as you said, Jack, never took care of himself, let himself go. And when Tony would sign the fight, he would use sparring not to get better. It would be his weight reducing way. It would be how he'd make weight. He would just spar a bunch of rounds and never really concentrate on anything. But then again, he didn't really have to. But he had a 29-year career. He's a special fighter, well-deserved. And again, somebody that, we won't see the likes of every generation. But I just wish he had more discipline when he, throughout his career, especially
Frank,
when he moved up.
But I'm going to tell you something. James Toney, at his very best, you put him against any all-time great at their very best.
He's never in over his head.
Exactly. You put him against Marvin Hagler. Tony's at his best at middleweight, at his very best. The problem is, fighters like Hagler were not inconsistent. They were always in good form. And Tony would have, what's he doing struggling with Dave Tiberi? I couldn't imagine, Hagler, Leonard, losing a fight. Well, he technically got the decision, having some bad fights. But then again, you see Tony dominate Holyfield.
Wait, whoa, Jack. Wait. He dominated the name Holyfield. Holyfield was in 2003. He was 40 years old? Or 41? He beat a shell of Holyfield. I'm glad you brought that up. He beat a shell of Holyfield. At that time, Holyfield fought Ruiz 3 times, only beat him 1 time, lost to Chris Bird. Holyfield's last great moments were in the 90s.
One of the fights that was scored a draw, Holyfield and Ruiz. Most people think Holyfield edged that fight out.
Okay, so even if we give him that, he still had a hard time with John Ruiz. But Tony beat the name Holyfield. I don't give him a lot of credit for that. I think Tony's best fight was against Urov for the cruiserweight title.
Right. Yeah.
That I don't think he ever put it together better, because a lot of people think of the Michael Nunn fight, but think about this, Jack. Michael Nunn was actually taking him to school until he caught him. Michael Nunn was having his way, and as Joe Bergman said, him against Tiberi is one of the worst decisions I've ever seen.
That was Tony's coming out party.
Right.
Michael Nunn was one of boxing's biggest stars, one of the best pound-for-pound fighters. He fought Tony. Tony was a no-name at the time. We didn't know.
Right. He was an underdog, and Michael Nunn was outboxing him until he got caught.
Michael Nunn was outboxing him, but the idea that Tony could turn it around with 1 punch in the 11th round and stop Nunn. I'm
going to give him credit for that. You're right. My point is this, though, Jack. Tony at middleweight and at super middleweight had some stinkers. You can make a case that Reggie Johnson beat him. Tiberi clearly beat him.
Yeah. Well,
Montel Griffin beat him twice at light heavyweight.
I thought Tony won both fights, but
But Jack, they were close enough. That there was that wiggle room there, and they're not in the same class of fighter.
Yeah. Tony, unfortunately, you're right. I can't argue with you, Frank. He was erratic. And something tells me if he was completely dedicated all the time, though, he wouldn't have had those clunkers occasionally the way he did. Okay.
Jack, that's the curse of being so gifted. And that's what the one thing more than one thing, but I will give Floyd Mayweather that prop. He always knew what was important, and he never let himself get out of shape. And Hopkins, the same thing applies to him, where Tony didn't have that discipline. But if you look back, you can make a case he was more skilled than both of them.
When Tony fought Roy Jones, that was an even money fight going in. That's the interesting thing that people forget. Maybe because Jones was considered to be a little unproven to some people at that.
And Tony had the perception of being the tougher, harder guy.
Right. So, yeah.
But I knew that Roy was going to win, Jack, because of his styles.
Tony was Tony was from Detroit, and spotlight fight of the week. You know, one of the I can't say the greatest fighter from Detroit because Sugar Ray Robinson was a Detroit fighter, but one of the all-time greats was from Detroit. It was a fight between two all-time greats, a spotlight fight, even though only one of them was at his peak at the time, and the other one was somewhat past it, even though he had some good wins left.
That was when Tommy Hearns defended the title, or did he win? I forget, Jack. Did he win the title or defend it against Duran?
He defended it.
Okay.
Wait. Duran beat Dave? No. Duran beat Davey Moore of June in 1983. So
and this was June of 84. So Hearns was the challenger.
Yeah, but you want to know something? I'm not sure. I think Hearns was a champion as well, if I'm not mistaken. But in any event, it was the names that made the fight. That's all we remember.
Exactly.
And I will say this, okay? As sensational as Hearns was and as devastating as the right hand was that flattened Duran, why did Duran train for that fight? He looked awful. He looked pudgy before he got hit. I mean,
Jack, were you saying that before the fight? Because I didn't think that before the fight.
He wasn't in training camp with him before the fight. I don't know how he's looking, Frank.
No, you said he looked pudgy in the ring, and I just don't remember anybody saying that before the fight. I think after the fact, because it was such a devastating defeat, that they kind of have to justify, well, why Hearns won. But Jack,
I don't know,
that's a terrible. That's a terrible.
Or the Beterbiev and Joe Smith might turn up not looking well toned this Saturday. You gotta assume that they're training hard.
Right. But you said he looked pudgy.
Duran when he was in the ring. He didn't look like the Duran that was in.
I think that's because he had a thoroughbred in front of him who he did not match up with. And I'm glad we're doing this fight, Jack, because I have had arguments with Duran fans over the years, and they all say, well, if it's the Duran that fought Leonard, he would have beat Hearns. No, he wouldn't have. Hearns will beat Duran every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And it's the same reason why Foreman will beat Frazier, because you have the shorter swarmer in Duran who can only do business inside. The problem is he can't get inside on Hearns, and he gets hurt before he gets inside. The same thing with Frazier. We never really saw Frazier get Foreman against the ropes or corner him, because he got hurt before he got there. He was one of the rare guys that could do that to Joe. And Hearns was the same thing with Duran. Duran could not get inside. And I don't care if they fight at welterweight, super middleweight, or whatever weight, that will always be a factor.
Good, but you can't say that for sure. Case in point, before the Duran-Hearns fight, Hearns' trainer-manager, Manuel Stewart, said, we expect to win by decision because no one knocks Duran out. So he was predicting this guy was going to win on points. So based on him stopping Duran in this fight, don't make an assumption that the Duran that showed up for the first Leonard fight, who's fast, relentless, could take a good shot, is going to get stopped like that. I highly doubt it. Now, would Hearns get control of the fight after a few rounds, the second half, and beat Duran? You know, I got to believe he would box him, and that would be the case, that Hearns would prevail. Okay,
Jack, I couldn't disagree more. This you can't take the cookbook to this. This fight only plays out one way. Duran cannot beat Hearns in retreat. He has to get inside. Hagler, he can retreat against because of the size. There isn't much of a size disparity. And Hagler is not the life taker puncher that Duran is. But Duran can only fight Hearns going forward. If he doesn't do that, Jack, you know what he looks like? He looks like Frazier in the second match against Foreman. Same result, only it goes longer. Hearns just has too many weapons that Duran just cannot overcome. And I don't know who said it, but I agree. Mayweather would not only lose to Hearns, he would have never fought him.
Well, I see a point. Perhaps Duran would try to counter, fight in the middle of the ring, back off, do different things.
It would look like Cuevas, Jack. It's the same thing.
But then it would it would go the distance if Duran
No
was
way.
fight carefully with Hearns. You're basing too much on one fight with Duran.
Jack, isn't that why they fight? So we see the result? If the result doesn't count, then why do we even watch? It's a terrible style matchup, I'm telling you. Jack, explain. How can Duran do any business unless he gets inside? He can't work his body from outside. He can't slow him down and beat him down or get to his head unless he's inside. And he has to get past that rapier jab and that missile-like right hand. It's a terrible matchup from Duran. And, Jack, here's how we know. Nobody else ever did that to Duran but Hearns.
Well, listen, I
Duran was sticking his tongue out at Hagler at the end of the 15th round when they fought.
Okay,
it's a bad style matchup. Bad style matchup.
Yeah.
And also, Jack, Hearns is one of the all-time greats. And in my opinion, Hearns may be one of the top 5 best pound-for-pound punchers in the history of boxing. The problem with Hearns is he's remembered for losing to Leonard and Hagler. His 2 biggest fights, he came out lost. But if you look at it, he lost to, in my opinion, the second greatest welterweight who has yet lived. And in Hagler on any list is a top 5 all-time middleweight.
We have okay. Let's just do a quick preview. This Saturday night, Artur Beterbiev and Joe Smith. Okay, they're each putting their version of the light heavyweight title on the line, and of course, Dmitry Bivol holds the other version. I think it would be better for the sport, for the division, if Beterbiev wins. And I can't help but root for Joe Smith, a guy I know. But I think
why? Because he's a more established guy at that weight?
No, because Bivol has already fought Joe Smith.
Okay, that's a good point.
I think it's the most marketable fight out there. Let's say Smith knocks out Beterbiev early, and they match him with Bivol. They can do that, but it's not the most enticing thing. But Beterbiev and Bivol seems to be an enticing, matchup, at least for the sport. That's my feeling as far as that goes. Now,
I agree with that, Jack. Who do you think is going to win?
It's a tough one. I mean, I know my co-host on the Mac and Jack show, Mac, he's predicting Joe Smith is going to destroy Beterbiev.
Well, he would pick Joe Smith to beat Michael Spinks.
That's his prediction. He just hopes Beterbiev they pull Beterbiev out at the right time if Smith is punishing him too much. You kind of have to go with Beterbiev, the accumulation of punches. Smart, has a good corner. Mark Ramsey, John Scully there in the corner. And not that Smith has a good corner as well. You kind of have to go with Beterbiev in that fight, in all likelihood. Because if Smith doesn't take him out, Beterbiev's busyness, the accumulation of punches, it's going to make it hard for Smith to get a decision. And the two of them are probably going to meet head on. So, I mean, that's their style. One of them is going to have to adjust a little. I could see Smith adjusting and backing off and boxing a little more. But is it going to be good enough to win rounds? I have doubts. What about you, Frank?
Jack, I actually believe that Joe Smith matches up with Beterbiev more than he does Bivol. And I'll tell you why. Joe Smith has a dynamite right hand. Nobody disputes that. Beterbiev comes in. I'm not going to say he comes straight in, but Beterbiev is one of those guys. He cannot fight backing up. He can't wait and react. He has to take the fight to Smith. I think that's going to give Smith an opportunity or opportunities to land that right hand, because I think there's a good shot that Beterbiev will be right in the path.
We're going to have to wrap it up to make who you pick.
Okay, I'm going to take Beterbiev to win, Jack, but I'll tell you what. Smith winning, I won't rule it out. Again, I'm taking Beterbiev. I think there's a chance there's a window for Smith because he'll be able to hit Beterbiev, and he's been hurt, but I take Beterbiev to win.
We're going with Beterbiev, but we wouldn't be shocked if Smith pulled it off.
No, the matchup is something that Joe can deal with. But he has to get him inside the first half of the fight, Jack. He can't go rounds with him. He's got to get him early. He's got to get him in the first half of the fight.
Okay, Frank. So I think that's it for the week, and we'll have a lot to talk about next week. Good show, Frank. It was a pleasure.
Good show, Jack. Thanks for everybody watching and tuning in.
Forgot to mention Lyman Pulley.
I want you to punch him for me.
Lyman Pulley, who I met up in Canastota.